All right, it is time for history. And if you are watching me right now, this means that you have your history book out. You kind of look through pages 220 to 222, and you kind of hit the highlights there. You have your activity book out. It's open to page 156, 157. And you've read over those things so that you're going to be ready to hear what I'm talking about. You, of course, will be reading this thoroughly also to gain your answers to fill in your activity book. Remember, it's good to keep up with your activity book because that's what a lot of your test answers, your quiz answers come from. So you don't want to come into a situation for quiz or test, remember, because it's open book, and not have those things ready for you to flip through and have access to. So where we left off, we see a progressive movement coming within the United States. We see Roosevelt is now president. We've distinguished ourselves within the Spanish-American War. We freed Cuba, and we gained a lot of territory in that sense. And a lot of people were liking that. A lot of people were not very comfortable with that. But of course, in a nation with so many people, everybody's going to have a different opinion. So now we're moving into, even though the subheading on your book and on page 220 says William Taft election of 1908 and William Howard Taft, we're still going to see a lot of Roosevelt as we're talking this. If you've already read through that, you already know that. Your vocabulary words for this point are the word commercial, open door policy, and Panama Canal. And I'm going to hit a couple high points with that and then allow you to finish off. So if you read through, you know, with foreign policy, you see at the bottom of page 220, during the early 1900s, U.S. policy promoted stronger commercial ties around the world. What we were doing is, you know, we didn't want to overtly, where it was so obvious to everyone, flex our power. So instead of flexing our military power, we began flexing our financial power, our buying and selling. And we used where we would buy and where we would sell as the United States of America to gain influence over countries that were not officially under the control of the United States. So you may be a country, you're going to see that with the Panama Canal, actually. Where we're going to insert our influence, but we're going to get something on the other side. You'll notice that there's always kind of a tit for tat kind of thing where you give me this, I'll give you that. And we're going to see that. So you'll see the commercial ties. We're going to use our financial power, our financial rigor to have influences over countries that don't specifically belong to the United States. During this period of history, it's the late 1800s. China is considered the oldest and largest Asian country, but during this period of history, they're very, very weak. And a lot of the European nations, the colonial nations, especially, and Japan, kind of wanted to carve China up, not let them be that large superpower in Asia that they are. The Secretary of State during this period of history, John Hay, didn't want to see that happen. He used his influence with Roosevelt saying we need an open door policy for China. If one country has access to China, all countries should have access to China. He was trying to, you know, put the force of the United States behind China to give China some legs to stand on to remain independent. And so that's kind of what the open door policy, China was open to everybody and nobody could come in and exert an enormous amount of influence, I guess, that the United States really didn't want. The key was to remain an independent China. Hay even supported China during the Boxer Rebellion. Now you see just a kind of a blurb about the Boxer Rebellion in your history book. Not funny, but where did the name Boxer Rebellion come from? The name actually came from the term boxer was actually a term that Westerners, which would be you and me, Westerners gave to this secret society of Chinese that they would practice this special type of calisthenics or exercise along with some boxing, and they believed that made them invulnerable, that they couldn't be defeated. And their actual name, and I'm probably going to completely butcher this, is the Yiquan. And they were called the Boxers, this secret society. And really what they started, their beginning focus as they started to gain influence and start this rebellion, they wanted to get rid of the Qing dynasty as well as all Westerners. But the dynasty was able to offer them this ability to be kind of a legitimate military power. And once they gained that, quote, legitimacy from the Qing dynasty, they then started their pursuit of trying to expel Westerners from China. And when I say expel, I mean harm them. So you will leave and you'll not come back. In the end, Western nations came together. They stopped the Boxers from what they were doing. And in the end, the Chinese government had to pay $333 million to other nations that stopped this rebellion. But the primary fighters, I guess, during this rebellion would be the Japanese and the Russians during this. And the people that faced the worst persecution were missionaries in China and Chinese converts to Christianity. Those were the people that the Boxers really kind of had it in for, and those were the people who faced the worst persecution during the Boxer Rebellion. So that's a little bit more about the Boxer Rebellion, where you get your name from, and the reparations that the Chinese government had to pay. Now, the United States returned the majority of the money that was given to them, and they earmarked it for Chinese students to go to college. And the U.S. felt like if they could see the American way of life, that we would become more friendly to them, and they would have a better taste for Americans as time went by. Of course, that turned out not to be true. We can see as that goes forward. Moving on, Roosevelt also expanded the role of the United States by beginning the Panama Canal. You see that at the bottom of page 221, moving on to page 222. Panama was seeking their independence from Colombia. The United States saw an opportunity here to aid Panama and maybe get a little something for this. So what they do is the U.S. Navy blocks Colombia from being able to enter into Panama. And by 1903, we see this kind of moving on. Panama gains their independence, and through that, the United States barters for this stretch of land through Panama, to which they were going to build this canal that's even, of course, in use today. The United States during this period of history is going to spend millions upon millions of dollars. And in the early 1900s, that's a lot of money. You didn't hear about billionaires in the 1900s. You heard about millionaires. So when you think this was over 100 years ago, that was a lot of money that was being spent. In 1914, the Panama Canal would open and provide a shortcut from the Caribbean, however you choose to say it, to the Pacific Ocean. This would be run by the United States till 1979. So from 1914 to 1979, this was a United States operation. In 1979, they merged together the Panama Canal Commission, which was a joint agency of the United States and Panama. And then on December 31st, 1999, so about 20 years ago, it was officially given over to the government of Panama. So we see again the United States working to build its influence with others around the world. And we see that a lot of this, Roosevelt had a real way with working with other countries to get that done. We'll see when Taft, we hear a little bit about Taft struggled, where Roosevelt succeeded. Taft, who was the person Roosevelt picked to succeed him. Taft struggled with keeping the progressives and the conservative Republicans together. Where Roosevelt could do it, Taft really had a problem with this. And a few of the things that hit Taft a little hard was the idea of tariffs. The progressives wanted the tariffs lowered. The conservative Republicans were saying no. A tariff is like a tax, like a foreign country brings in a product to the United States, they pay a percentage of a tax for bringing their item into the United States. And of course, that's passed on to the consumers. So the progressives said, this is going to help the American people, give them more choices. But the conservative Republicans were saying it's going to give them more choices, but we're bringing in a product from another country where they don't treat their workers, they don't have the same responsibility to their workers, that now are going to be starting during this period of history, that the United States is going to impose on the government, or not the governments, but business within the United States. And all of those things are good things. We're going to see the 40-hour work week. We're going to see child labor laws. We're going to see a minimum wage. Well, 40-hour work weeks means that you're not getting as much product done. Minimum wage means I have to pay my worker X number of dollars. That's the very lowest that you can pay that. But when you put all of these requirements on, that cha-ching, 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 that makes that item more expensive. So when you bring a product in from another country that don't have the same requirements, they can produce a cheaper product because they're not paying their people well. They're not doing those things that are expected in the United States. So the conservatives were saying, no. They need to pay that. That government needs to pay that to bring that product in, to kind of make that fair to the businesses within the United States. So we're on a level playing field. So Taft really kind of had to traverse those waters. People didn't like it. They were angry if you said yes, they were angry if you say no. There were other things that the progressives were not very pleased about. So Taft, where Roosevelt, he was a Rough Rider for a reason, and it was just something that Taft struggled with. So you're going to see those struggles within your book. So make sure you go back, do all of your reading. I hit a couple things. You'll notice on page 222 at the top, the picture you have, the Great White Fleet consisted of 16 U.S. Navy battleships with white hulls. The fleet demonstrated that the U.S. had become a major sea power. One of the questions on your activity page is going to center around that, so make sure you get your answer there. All of your answers are there. Take your time and read. I sure hope you enjoy these highlights, and I will catch you later.